The afternoon sun was shining brightly on the harbor. Dozens of people had gathered near the docks, their eyes drawn to a massive luxury boat that sat idle in the water. It was not just any boat. It was owned by a rich woman who was known in the city for her wealth, pride, and strong personality. The boat was her symbol of success, a floating palace that showed her power to the world. But for the last several weeks, that palace had turned into a problem. The boat had developed a fault in its engine. No matter what she tried, it refused to run properly. It was as if the machine itself was mocking her. For a woman who always got what she wanted, this was more than a technical issue. It was a blow to her pride. She had already hired more than 30 professional engineers, all well-trained and highly paid. Each one had come with confidence. They had studied thick manuals, used expensive tools, and spent hours checking wires, pipes, and bolts. But in the end, each of them gave the same answer. The problem was too complex, or the fault could not be fixed without replacing the entire engine. Replacing it meant spending a fortune, and even then, there was no guarantee of success. Every time one of the engineers admitted defeat, the rich woman's temper grew hotter. She would stand on the deck of the boat, hands on her hips, glaring at the failed expert as if her eyes alone could burn holes through their pride. To her, their failure wasn't just about the boat. It was about her reputation. People whispered behind her back that her grand vessel had turned into nothing but an expensive decoration on the water. On this particular day, another engineer had just walked away, shaking his head in frustration. The crowd that had gathered began to murmur, wondering if this was the end of the story. Maybe the boat would never sail again. The rich woman felt the weight of all those eyes on her. Her pride screamed inside her chest. She would not. She could not allow people to think she was beaten. It was then that a poor man stepped forward from the crowd. He was not dressed in a suit like the engineers. His clothes were simple, worn from years of hard work. His hands were rough, marked with tiny scars from tools and labor. He was not someone anyone would expect to challenge such a problem. Yet there was something calm in his eyes, a quiet confidence that made him different. This man was a father, known among his neighbors for being hardworking but poor. He lived in a small house with his family and spent most of his days fixing broken machines to earn a little money. He had never gone to fancy schools, and he had no certificates to prove his skills. But life had taught him what books could not. Years of repairing small engines, bicycles, and household machines had sharpened his mind in ways no classroom ever could. The crowd shifted and whispered as he came closer. Some laughed softly, shaking their heads. What could this poor man do when 30 trained engineers had already failed? Even the woman looked at him with a mix of amusement and disbelief. She raised her eyebrow, her lips curling into a half-smile that was more of a challenge than a welcome. "And who are you?" she asked sharply, her voice carrying across the dock. The man lowered his head slightly in respect before answering. "Just a simple worker, madam. But if you allow me, I would like to try." The crowd burst into laughter. Some clapped their hands as if they were watching a comedy. A poor worker daring to fix a luxury boat that had defeated the brightest minds. It sounded impossible. But the man's calm tone and steady eyes held no trace of arrogance. He was serious. The rich woman stared at him for a long moment, then let out a short, mocking laugh. "Try? Do you think you are smarter than the 30 engineers I have already paid? Do you think your hands can do what their machines could not?" The man did not flinch. He only replied softly, "Sometimes, madam, problems are not solved by machines or money. Sometimes they need patience and a different way of seeing." Her pride, wounded and burning, pushed her to dare him. She spread her arms wide, her voice rising for everyone to hear. "Fine then. If you are so smart, fix my boat. I give you permission. Show me what you can do. But remember, 30 experts have already failed. Do not embarrass yourself in front of all these people." The crowd cheered at the drama, their eyes now glued to the man. The poor father nodded once, calm as ever. He did not answer her challenge with words, but with action. Slowly, he stepped onto the deck of the massive boat. His steps were careful, not rushed, as though he already respected the machine he was about to touch. For a moment, silence covered the dock. Everyone watched as this ordinary man prepared to face an extraordinary challenge. The woman crossed her arms, her chin lifted high, fully expecting him to give up within minutes. To her, this was entertainment, another proof that only wealth and status carried real power. But deep inside the man's heart, there was something stronger than wealth. It was his determination, his love for problem-solving, and his belief that even the most difficult challenges could be broken down if faced with patience and courage. He was not there to prove his pride. He was there because he truly believed every problem had a solution, no matter how impossible it seemed. The harbor, once noisy, now seemed to hold its breath. The story of the rich woman's broken boat had just taken a new turn. No one knew it yet, but what was about to happen would soon become a lesson remembered by all who stood there. And so, the stage was set. A proud rich woman, a broken boat that had defeated 30 engineers, and one poor father who dared to step forward when no one else believed. The impossible challenge had just begun. The poor father stood on the deck of the boat, feeling the weight of countless eyes watching him. People whispered among themselves, doubting him even before he had touched the engine. Some laughed quietly, some shook their heads, and a few even pointed fingers as if he was only making a fool of himself. But the man paid no attention. He had lived his whole life in a world where people doubted him. Poverty had made him invisible, yet his struggles had given him a strength that no one could see from the outside. He looked around the boat. The shining deck, the polished wood, and the golden handles all reflected the wealth of the woman who owned it. Everything on this vessel spoke of luxury, but it also spoke of pride. He could feel her eyes on him, sharp and challenging, waiting for him to fail so she could laugh again. Yet inside his heart there was no fear. He was used to working with machines, whether big or small. To him, a machine was like a puzzle. It spoke in its own language of sounds, smells, and signs. If you listened carefully, it told you what was wrong. He placed his hand on the railing, took a slow breath, and then bent down toward the engine room. The smell of oil and rust filled the air. Pipes ran in all directions, and bolts shone like tiny stars under the dim light. It was a complicated structure, enough to intimidate anyone, but his eyes scanned every part with patience. He did not rush. Instead, he let his mind settle into the rhythm of observation. The rich woman leaned slightly forward, her arms crossed, a half-smile playing on her lips. To her, this was nothing but a show. She had already seen 30 engineers with fancy tools and expensive knowledge. If they could not solve it, how could a poor man with rough hands and no degree succeed? The crowd mirrored her thoughts. They were waiting for the moment he would stand up, confused, and admit defeat, but the man was in no hurry. He checked the wiring with his fingers, feeling the texture, the looseness, the warmth. He listened to the faint hum inside the machine as he turned a small wheel. He noticed tiny scratches on one of the pipes and stains near the joints that others had overlooked. Every detail was like a clue, and he collected them one by one. As he worked silently, memories floated in his mind. He remembered the days when his children were small, and the only way he could provide for them was by repairing old machines. Sometimes it was a neighbor's sewing machine, sometimes a broken bicycle, and often small water pumps that nobody else wanted to touch. People would laugh at him then too, saying, "How can this poor man fix something so broken?" But each time he proved them wrong. He didn't do it for fame or respect. He did it because failure was never an option when his family needed food. The crowd grew restless. "What is he doing?" someone muttered. "He hasn't even used proper tools," another said. Some children giggled, pointing at his worn-out clothes compared to the polished boots of the engineers who had come before him. Yet the man continued without a word. His silence was his shield and his focus was his strength. The woman finally spoke again, her tone sharp. "Well, do you see now that this is not the same as fixing a bicycle or a water pump? You are wasting my time." The man looked up at her for the first time since he had begun. His eyes were calm, steady, and respectful. "Madam," he said softly, "sometimes the biggest machines fail because of the smallest reasons. Let me try a little longer." Something in his tone silenced even the most impatient watchers. It wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. There was a quiet power in his voice that made people pause. The woman tilted her head, still doubtful but slightly intrigued. Against her pride, she found herself waiting, curious to see what this man would uncover. The father returned to the engine. He tapped gently on one of the panels and listened to the sound it made. Hollow, strange. He unscrewed a small section and found a thin pipe clogged with hardened residue. It looked minor, almost unimportant, yet to him it was like discovering the heart of the problem. He studied it closely, his mind piecing together how such a small blockage could cause the entire system to fail. His fingers worked carefully, cleaning the pipe with the precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Sweat rolled down his forehead, but he didn't stop. The onlookers grew quieter now, their laughter fading into uneasy silence. For the first time, they sensed he might not be wasting his time after all. Inside, the father thought of his children. He thought of the nights he had gone to bed hungry so they could eat. He thought of the mornings when he woke before sunrise to take on odd jobs, fixing whatever people brought him. This boat was not just another machine. It was a chance to prove that even a poor man's skills had value. It was a chance to show his children that dignity came not from wealth, but from perseverance and wisdom. The woman, though outwardly calm, felt a flicker of doubt. She had mocked him, dared him, even expected him to crawl away in shame. But here he was, still working with steady hands, showing a patience the engineers had lacked. She tried to tell herself it was luck or coincidence, but a quiet voice in her mind whispered, "What if he really succeeds?" The air around the dock grew tense. People leaned forward, craning their necks to see what he was doing. The sound of metal clinking softly under his hands filled the silence. Every movement he made seemed deliberate, as though he was not only repairing a machine but also stitching together a lesson for everyone who watched. He tightened the last screw, wiped the sweat from his brow, and stepped back slightly. His eyes scanned the engine one final time, checking every connection, every pipe, every wire. The moment of truth was still far away, but already there was a sense that something important was unfolding. He knew he was not finished yet, but the first breakthrough had come. What 30 engineers had missed in their rush to prove their skill, he had found by listening, observing, and respecting the machine. It was only the beginning, but the path forward was now clear in his mind. As the crowd watched in suspense, the poor father's quiet determination began to outshine their doubts. For the first time since the boat had broken down, hope stirred in the air. And though the woman would not admit it aloud, a tiny spark of respect began to grow in her heart. The man bent down again, ready to continue his work. He was no longer just a poor father on a rich woman's boat. He was becoming the one person who might do the impossible. The poor father stayed bent over the great engine, his hands working patiently as the crowd shifted around the dock. By now, many of the whispers had died down. People no longer laughed as freely as before. Instead, they watched with curiosity, wondering how far this man could really go. He had already found something the engineers had missed, and that simple discovery had changed the mood of the entire place. The woman stood with her arms still folded, but her face had changed slightly. She was no longer smiling in mockery. Instead, her eyes narrowed with interest. She wanted to see how long this man could last. A part of her still believed he would eventually fail, but deep down a seed of doubt was planted. What if he succeeded? What would that mean for her pride? The father ignored the heavy silence around him. He knew the power of doubt. It was louder than any laughter and sharper than any insult. But he had lived with doubt his entire life. People doubted him when he fixed old fans, when he repaired broken tools, when he promised his children that tomorrow would be better. Doubt had never stopped him. If anything, it pushed him to prove to himself that he was capable. As he worked, the engine seemed to come alive in his hands. Each bolt, each pipe, each valve spoke to him in its own way. He checked the connections again, tracing the lines of fuel and oil as though he was reading a story written in metal. He noticed where the flow was interrupted, where pressure might have failed, and where parts were wearing down. It was as if the machine itself wanted to tell its secrets to someone patient enough to listen. The crowd leaned closer. Every movement he made seemed to draw them in further. They had seen engineers with gleaming instruments and expensive tools, yet those men had all walked away defeated. Now this poor father, with nothing but his eyes, hands, and simple knowledge, was making progress. It was a scene none of them would forget. The woman finally broke the silence. "You work as though you have studied this all your life," she said, her voice softer than before. The man did not look up. He kept his focus on the engine and replied calmly, "Madam, life is the best teacher. Books give knowledge, but struggle gives understanding. When you must fix something to feed your family, you learn to see what others overlook." His words touched a few people in the crowd. Some nodded quietly, realizing the truth behind them. Hardship had taught him lessons no classroom could offer. Where others saw only a machine, he saw the story of wear, pressure, and time. The woman said nothing more, but her eyes followed him closely. She wanted to believe that wealth and education always stood above poverty. But the way this man worked challenged everything she thought she knew. Time passed slowly, yet the man did not seem hurried. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and continued checking deeper parts of the system. He found another small error, almost hidden behind layers of pipes, a tiny valve that had become jammed. With steady hands, he adjusted it, cleaned it, and returned it to its place. Again, it was something so simple that most people would have ignored it. But to him, every part mattered. A boat was like a family, he thought. Ignore one small member and the whole unit could fall apart. The crowd grew restless again, but this time it was not because of doubt. It was because they could feel the tension rising. They knew something was building toward a moment. Would the engine roar to life? Would the man succeed where so many had failed? The father stepped back for a moment, breathing deeply. He thought of his children again. He imagined their faces, their small smiles when he came home after long days. He remembered the nights when he had fixed things under a dim lamp while his family slept, the sound of their soft breathing giving him strength. This boat was not his, and the challenge was not his responsibility. Yet he felt as though this task was tied to his entire life. If he succeeded, it would not just be about a machine. It would be about proving that even the poor carried wisdom, skill, and dignity that the world often ignored. One of the men in the crowd finally called out, "Well, can you start it now?" His voice was impatient but also curious. Others echoed him, leaning forward eagerly. The father looked up for a brief moment and answered, "Not yet. Patience is needed. If I rush, the mistake will return." His calmness surprised them. Most people, under so much pressure and attention, would hurry just to prove themselves. But this man was different. He treated the boat as though it was alive, as though it deserved respect. The woman's sharp gaze softened further, though she quickly hid it behind her pride. She told herself she still had the upper hand. Yet inside she felt a strange sense of admiration growing. This man, poor as he was, carried himself with dignity that no wealth could buy. The father returned to work, checking the fuel lines now. He found dust and tiny particles collected at the filter. Carefully, he cleaned them out. He tightened loose screws that had been left unchecked for too long. Piece by piece, he restored the system. His mind worked like a map, connecting every part to the other. Where others had given up because the system seemed too big, he broke it down into small, understandable steps. The crowd was no longer restless. They were silent, almost reverent, as though watching a craftsman carve life into wood. The longer they watched, the more they realized that true genius was not always loud or dressed in wealth. Sometimes it was hidden in quiet hands that worked with love and dedication. At last, the father straightened his back and looked at the engine once more. He had done what he could. The boat was ready to be tested. A hush fell over the dock as people realized the moment was close. The woman raised her chin, trying to keep her voice steady. "So is it done?" she asked. The father nodded slowly. "I have fixed what was broken," he said. "But only the boat itself can tell us the truth." The crowd leaned forward, excitement building like a storm. The man reached for the ignition switch, his hand steady, his eyes calm. He paused for a breath, not because he was nervous, but because he respected the moment. This was not just about starting an engine. It was about proving a lifetime of struggle had meaning. The dock grew silent enough to hear the waves against the wood. Children clutched their parents' hands. Even the woman's heart beat faster, though she would never admit it. All eyes were on the poor father as he prepared to attempt the impossible. And then, with a gentle but firm motion, he turned the switch. The father's fingers turned the switch with steady control, and in that instant the world around the dock seemed to freeze. The crowd leaned closer, their breaths held tight in their chests. For weeks this boat had been silent, mocking the skill of every engineer who touched it. Now, a poor man with no degree was about to test if his effort had truly brought the machine back to life. At first there was only silence, then a faint hum. The engine sputtered, coughed, and shook as if waking from a long sleep. The sound was weak, but it was sound. The people gasped, some clapping their hands to their mouths. The woman's eyes widened, her face betraying a shock she tried to hide. The man did not panic. He leaned closer, listening to the vibration, the rhythm of the machine. To others it sounded broken still, but to him, it was the voice of a patient recovering from illness. It was breathing again, but it needed strength. With quick adjustments, he turned a small valve, checked the fuel flow, and tapped gently on one of the pipes he had fixed. The engine sputtered once more, louder this time. Then, like thunder cracking across the sky, it roared to life. A deep, powerful sound filled the harbor. The water rippled as the boat trembled with energy. Smoke cleared from the exhaust, replaced by the clean rhythm of a running machine. The crowd erupted into cheers. Some clapped, some shouted in amazement, and others simply stood in disbelief, unable to accept what their eyes and ears were telling them. The boat that 30 engineers had declared hopeless was alive again, roaring proudly as though laughing at those who had given up. The woman stepped back in shock. For a moment, she forgot her pride. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes locked on the man standing calmly beside the engine. She had dared him to try, certain he would fail. Now she stood humbled by the truth in front of her. The father did not raise his arms in triumph. He did not shout or boast. He simply placed his hand on the railing, closed his eyes for a brief second, and breathed deeply. Inside, his heart was full, not with pride, but with peace. He had proven to himself and to the world that patience and knowledge born of hardship could achieve what money and arrogance could not. The crowd rushed forward, surrounding the boat. People shouted his name, though most of them did not even know it. They called him master, genius, hero. For once, the poor man who had always been overlooked was standing in the center of admiration. Yet he remained calm, his humble nature unchanged. The woman finally spoke, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "How did you do it?" she asked almost in a whisper. The man opened his eyes and looked at her with respect. "Machines are like people," he said gently. "When they fail, it is not always because of something big. Sometimes it is the small things hidden where no one looks. If you listen with patience, they will tell you what they need." His words carried across the dock, sinking into the hearts of everyone who heard them. Many nodded quietly, realizing the depth of wisdom in his simple explanation. It was not magic. It was not luck. It was the result of patience, careful observation, and the will to keep trying when others had given up. The woman lowered her gaze for a moment. For the first time, she felt her pride crack. She had believed that wealth could buy solutions, that knowledge came only from schools and certificates. But standing before her was a poor father who had shattered that belief with his hands and his heart. The engine continued to roar, steady and strong. The boat seemed alive again, proud to float under the sun. Children in the crowd cheered, pointing at the man as if he were a hero from a story. Even the elders whispered among themselves, saying they had never witnessed such a thing in their lives. The father, however, thought of none of this. His mind was on his family. He imagined his children's smiles when he told them the story of this day. He imagined the quiet pride in their eyes when they realized their father had done something that 30 engineers could not. To him, that was the true victory, not the cheers of the crowd, not the astonished gaze of the rich woman, but the joy it would bring to the people he loved most. The woman stepped closer, her voice trembling with emotion she rarely showed. You have done the impossible," she said. "I doubted you, I mocked you, and yet you succeeded where so many failed. I owe you respect, and more than that, I owe you thanks." The man bowed his head slightly, his humility unshaken. "Respect is not owed, madam," he replied softly. "It is earned by deeds. I only did what needed to be done." His answer struck her deeply. She had spent her life surrounded by people who sought her favor, who bowed to her wealth and power. Yet here was a man who did not seek her approval, who did not boast about his victory. He stood tall, not because of money but because of character. The crowd slowly began to quiet down, though their eyes remained fixed on him. In that moment, everyone present understood that they had witnessed more than just the repair of a boat. They had seen a lesson unfold before their eyes, a lesson about humility, perseverance, and the hidden strength of those the world often ignores. The woman, still overwhelmed, asked him one final question. "Tell me, what do you want in return?" "Money, work, a place among my engineers." The man looked at her with calm eyes, his answer simple. "I want nothing but to go home to my family," he said. "That is where my true treasure is." The crowd gasped softly at his words. To turn away from wealth, from offers that could change his life, seemed unthinkable. But to him it was clear. His family was worth more than gold, more than pride, more than anything the world could offer. The woman's heart softened further. For the first time in her life, she looked at a poor man not with pity, not with superiority, but with genuine respect. She realized that wealth had blinded her to the greatness hidden in ordinary people. The engine continued to run, strong and steady, as though proud of the man who had restored it. The sun shone on the water, sparkling like 1,000 diamonds, and the sound of the waves carried the story beyond the dock, as though nature itself wanted to spread the lesson. That day, the poor father did not just fix a boat. He fixed the pride of a woman, the doubts of a crowd, and the mistaken belief that wealth defined intelligence. He showed that true power lay in patience, humility, and determination. As he stepped off the boat, the crowd parted for him, their eyes filled with admiration. The woman herself moved aside, bowing her head slightly, a gesture no one had ever seen her make before. The poor father walked quietly, his steps humble, yet every person there knew they were witnessing the walk of a man greater than any engineer, greater than any title or degree. And so, the impossible had been made possible, not by wealth, not by arrogance, but by the steady hands and unshakable spirit of a poor father. The poor father stepped off the boat slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, though his heart was light. Around him, the crowd continued to murmur in amazement. Many people were still staring at the boat, as if trying to convince themselves that it had truly been repaired. Others turned their eyes toward him, wondering how someone so humble, so ordinary in appearance, could accomplish what 30 engineers could not. The rich woman remained near the deck, her expression quiet, almost thoughtful. She had spent much of her life surrounded by wealth, power, and people who only agreed with her. She had never expected to meet someone who would challenge her assumptions so completely. She had dared this man to try, certain he would fail, yet here he was, standing calmly, his hands clean, his posture unshaken, and the boat alive behind him. The father looked at the woman with a polite nod. "Madam," he said softly, "your boat is ready to sail again. I hope it serves you well." The woman's lips trembled. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion she rarely showed. I owe you more than words can express," she said. "I doubted you, I mocked you, and yet, you succeeded. You have taught me a lesson I will never forget." The man's eyes lowered respectfully. "Madam, I did not do this to teach anyone a lesson. I did it because the task needed to be done. If others can learn from it, then I am grateful, but that was never my intention." His humility struck everyone around him. It was rare to see such greatness without pride. The crowd grew quiet again, their minds reflecting on what had just happened. The wealthy and the ordinary, the confident and the doubtful, all witnessed something extraordinary. It was not just about the boat. It was about character, courage, and the value of knowledge gained through life's challenges, rather than wealth or formal education. Children in the crowd whispered to their parents, eyes wide with wonder. "Did you see that?" one asked. "He fixed the boat, and he's just like us." Parents nodded, realizing the lesson being given to their children was more valuable than any school could offer. "Yes," one parent said softly. "Sometimes it is the quiet, hard-working people who change the world, not the rich or famous." The woman turned toward the crowd and spoke, her voice now filled with respect. "Everyone here has seen something today. It is proof that greatness is not measured by wealth, by titles, or by appearances. Sometimes it is hidden in the most unlikely places. This man has shown us that patience, understanding, and courage can achieve what money and education cannot always reach." The crowd erupted in applause once again. People cheered, shouted, and clapped. Some even wept quietly, moved by the story unfolding before them. They had watched a man defy expectations, overcome doubt, and achieve the impossible without arrogance or demand. It was a moment they would remember for the rest of their lives. The father, however, remained calm. He had done what needed to be done. To him, the applause and admiration were not the reward. The real reward was the quiet satisfaction of completing a task with honesty, patience, and skill. He thought of his family waiting for him at home, their faces, their smiles, their pride in him. That was worth more than all the riches in the world. As the crowd began to disperse, the rich woman approached him. She extended her hand, a gesture that spoke volumes. "I would like to offer you a position if you desire," she said. "You have shown skills and wisdom that cannot be taught. I want you to join my team." The man shook his head gently. "Thank you, madam, but I cannot leave my family," he replied. "My work, my joy is with them. I fix what I can, provide for them, and teach my children to face challenges with patience and courage. That is my greatest reward." The woman paused, understanding the depth of his words. For the first time, she realized that life's true value is measured not by possessions but by love, family, and integrity. She bowed her head slightly, a silent gesture of respect that the crowd noticed immediately. Her wealth and pride had taught her nothing in comparison to the lessons she had learned from this humble man. The father smiled softly and began to walk away. He did not rush. His steps were steady, confident, and humble all at once. The crowd followed him with their eyes, many whispering words of admiration and awe. They knew they had witnessed something rare, a display of true human greatness that money could not buy. As he reached the edge of the dock, the man turned one last time toward the boat. The engine hummed gently, alive and powerful. He nodded to it quietly, as if thanking it for allowing him to do his work well. Then he turned toward his home, toward his family, the place where his true greatness was rooted. In the days that followed, the story spread across the city. Newspapers wrote about it, and neighbors told the tale with pride. "A poor father fixed a boat that 30 engineers could not," they would say. Children repeated the story, dreaming of being patient and brave like him. Adults reflected on their own lives, questioning whether they had valued wealth over wisdom, pride over humility. The woman, too, changed in subtle but meaningful ways. She became more humble, more willing to listen, and more respectful of people regardless of their status. She never forgot the lesson of the boat, nor the quiet, powerful man who taught it to her. The father returned to his daily life, humble as ever. He continued repairing machines, helping neighbors, and providing for his children. Yet now there was a difference. He carried with him the silent acknowledgement of a crowd, the respect of a wealthy woman, and the quiet knowledge that he had proven the power of patience, skill, and integrity. His children looked up to him with pride. They understood that their father's value was not in the money he earned or the work he completed, but in the lessons he had taught them about life. They learned that true courage is quiet, that intelligence is not always measured by degrees, and that the heart and mind can achieve what the world says is impossible. The boat, now repaired, sailed proudly once more. Every time it cut through the waves, it carried with it a story of a poor father who dared to try, who listened, who worked with patience, and who succeeded against all odds. It became a symbol of hope and a lesson that greatness could be found in the most unlikely places. And so, the story ended not with riches or fame, but with respect, humility, and the quiet joy of a man who had proven that the human spirit could triumph over doubt, prejudice, and impossibility. The lesson was clear for everyone who witnessed it. The value of a person lies not in wealth, titles, or education, but in courage, patience, skill, and integrity. The man returned home, greeted by his children's laughter and the warm smiles of his family. He felt the peace and contentment that only true fulfillment can bring. In that moment, he realized that he had not only fixed a boat, but had also strengthened the bonds of family, community, and the belief in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Life continued, but the story lived on. People remembered the day the impossible was made possible. They remembered the poor father, who had shown them all that true greatness lies within, waiting to be revealed through patience, courage, and unwavering determination. And in the hearts of everyone who heard the story, the lesson remained. No matter how small or ordinary someone may seem, they can achieve the extraordinary if they work with their heart, their mind, and their unwavering will.